Hello, everyone. Welcome to my afternoon rant. It's Dr. Amadi, and happy Friday to you all. Today, I'm going to be talking about changing habits. So, this is one of the keys to living healthily, and it's maybe simple, but that doesn't mean that it's easy. Functional medical doctors understand that it's people's lifestyle habits even more so than their genetics. Thanks for joining me. Hi, KK. Thanks for joining in. Yeah, it's people's lifestyle habits. That's what really, good afternoon. That's what really makes the difference between whether they're healthy and whether they're not healthy. And habits it can be your friend or they can be your enemy. And oftentimes they may be a little bit of both. But human beings operate mostly by habit. We may not think that we do. We may think that we do most things consciously with our frontal lobes, but that's just not the case. And the reason why it's not is because our unconscious mind is 10 times faster than our conscious mind. So our conscious mind can only handle a small amount of the incoming stimuli at a time. The vast majority is handled by the unconscious mind, and it is there that our habits tend to lie. Oftentimes we will acquire our habits as we're growing up from our families, and that's why people who are raised in a certain family, even though they may not have certain genetic traits, but they may tend to acquire certain lifestyle habits and values from their adoptive parents. So the influences that we have when we're very young are very strong, and even though they may not be the best for us, but that is what we will naturally tend to do because that is what we have seen as we're growing up. Later on, we may learn that certain things that we saw our parents do might not really be that healthy, but by then we've already come to associate perhaps certain of those things with being a grown-up. So for example, smoking. If a person grows up in a family where one of the parents smokes tobacco, they are far more likely to smoke tobacco than if either of their parents didn't. And if both of their parents smoke, then they are even more likely to grow up to be a smoker. Now, does that mean that they can't stop smoking or that they can't decide never to start that? No, of course it doesn't mean that, but it means that they will have that tendency. And habits kind of, you can visualize them this way. Nerves that fire in a sequence, the more times they fire in that same sequence, the more connections they will grow in between each other so that it becomes easier and faster to fire again down that same sequence over and over and over again until by the time the person's nerve cells have fired in that sequence many times, then it becomes much harder for them to fire in any other sequence or go down any other pathway. You can kind of look at it like if you were walking in a forest where there were no trails and the bush was very thick, if you pushed your way through there and made a little path, eventually as you kept going back and forth down it, the path would become wider and deeper and broader, and it would be harder and harder to depart into the brush than it would be to just go down that same path. So we do many things without thinking about it. They're just habits. Just to give you a for instance of that, one time as I was driving past a house that I used to live in, I started to turn just automatically to go there without thinking about it until I thought, now wait a moment, I don't live there anymore. And then I had to turn back. But that was just something that I did automatically. And most people have certain daily routines, and that's why this whole coronavirus thing has been so disruptive and disturbing. I mean, one of the reasons is that people are not used to abandoning their old routines and acquiring different routines or making different routines. We do feel most comfortable when we're in a situation where things are predictable and where you just do certain things in a certain sequence every day. So a lot of people, like the first thing that they do once they get up in the morning, maybe they go to the bathroom, maybe they have a cup of coffee. I don't know which order they do that in, but a lot of those people do those things relatively soon after awakening. And, they've done it that way every day. And maybe what they put in their morning beverage is the same every day, whatever it is. Whether it's sugar or milk or cream or, whether they're having, let's say a green tea or whatever they're having, or if they're having a morning smoothie or whatever they're doing, a lot of times they just do this without having to think about it. And, it's kind of interesting, but people who are called functional medical doctors, of which I am proud to count myself one, these are people who actually look at what is the cause of the symptoms that the patient is experiencing and actually tries to deal with the symptoms by addressing the cause of them. What a logical thing to do. In any case, functional medical doctors know that our lifestyle habits are really the things that determine our health, and that in order to have better health, we need to be willing to change our lifestyle habits. And, if we're not, then, we can take medication. And I'm not saying that nobody ever needs to take medication, but a lot of times there's things that could be done that would restore our bodies to a more natural state of health, either in addition to or instead of taking medication. So just to give you a for instance of that, people who have high blood pressure or other, circulatory or vascular problems would be greatly benefited by exercising, as all of us would. But, for some people it's especially hard to, because they've never been physically active before, and so it may not be comfortable for them. So just to give you an example of that, my mother, who was raised in a rather sedentary lifestyle for a girl, she didn't do any physical exercise, and so she decided when she was, I'm going to say she must have been in her, definitely in her late 30s, early 40s, before she started to want to run. And in the beginning, it was more uncomfortable for her because she wasn't used to doing it, and it didn't feel good right away because her muscles could get stiff and sore, and maybe she would be a bit out of breath and lack stamina. So in the beginning, it was very helpful for her if I would come along with her. So we would run around the Central Park Reservoir in New York and keep each other company, and talk and laugh and have a good old time. But on those days when I wasn't available to go with her, or those days when the weather was nasty out, raining or snowing, then she would usually not go because she wouldn't have me to distract her and, from the pain of going out there. But, eventually, once she began doing it often enough, like every day, eventually she found that the pain went away. She was getting the runner's high and the endorphins, and she would go out there regardless of whether I could go with her or not, regardless of whether the weather was nice or not. If it was sunny or rainy or snowy, she would still be out there because she had made a new habit. So, oftentimes people think about habits as things that are bad. Habits can be good or bad. Hi, Donna. Thanks for joining in. Yeah, habits can be good or bad. For example, if you're in the habit of exercising, then you will tend to do it even when the conditions are not conducive. For example, even when you're short on time, you may still squeeze some in there because you enjoy it so much and it reduces your stress so much. Whereas a person who is not used to doing it and is not in the habit of it might say, oh, I'm not going to get a chance to do my full routine today, so I'll put it off till tomorrow. Tomorrow I'll do it. But, they might not because something else might come up then. But, people have their various different good habits and bad habits. Some people are in the habit of drinking water, for example. Some people are not in the habit of hardly ever drinking. Some people will drink sodas and artificially sweetened drinks, and that's just their habit. Or they'll drink alcohol, and that's just their habit. Excuse me. And sometimes habits come in clusters and groups. So there are certain things that a person will generally do in a certain setting, maybe with certain people, or while they're doing certain other things. So, for example, some people, let's say that smoke cigarettes, maybe drinking coffee is a trigger for them. Or maybe getting together with certain friends of theirs who also smoke is a trigger for them. So maybe if somebody is looking to break a bad habit, maybe they should be aware of what conditions would cause them to be most likely to engage in such a thing. So if they know that, for example, every time when they get off work and they meet Joe and they go to the bar and they have a few drinks, if that's a habit and if they're looking to get out of it, then maybe they might be better off not meeting with Joe, or maybe meeting with Joe in a different setting where they're not likely to be as exposed to the temptation. People can have group, group lifestyle change support. So, for example, like AA for Alcoholics Anonymous, that's just one example of a 12-step program in which people are banding together to support one another in their efforts to change their habits. And changing their habits is extraordinarily difficult. And this is the reason why a lot of conventional doctors simply won't bother to counsel patients about this, because they've already given up on them. And they say, oh, well, Mr. So-and-so has been smoking for 25 years. I guess he's just going to keep on smoking, and there's no point in my saying anything to him about it. And so they won't waste any of the 7 minutes that they allocate to a medical office visit with doing any counseling. But it's kind of too bad, because there are some patients, and it's always very pleasurable when you run into them, there are some patients who actually will, if a doctor says something, actually consider it and maybe even do something about it, might even change. So I think it's always good to give the patient the benefit of the doubt, and at least this way they can't say that you didn't tell them. And, but the sad part is that people are so resistant to change that there has been studies done of patients who, let's say, needed a coronary artery bypass graft surgery. Hi, Marisol. Thanks for joining in. Yeah, these are patients who needed surgery because one or more of the arteries to their heart was partially or completely blocked, and so they wanted to bypass it. And the surgeon would explain to the patient that, you know what, this will be a measure that may help you temporarily, but unless in the long run you change certain of your lifestyle habits, maybe you change your diet, maybe you start exercising, maybe you cut out smoking, maybe you don't drink as much, maybe you do some combination of the above, although those patients are really in a very good position to take advantage of that information because they're sort of in a crisis and they're going through some things, and this is a good point where they can stop and evaluate and say, well, do I want to keep doing this anymore if it's going to either shorten my lifespan or if it's going to possibly cause me more morbidity towards the end, less functionality towards the end. But the sad part is that most people, when confronted with those choices, actually choose not to choose, and they keep on doing whatever they were doing, however destructive it was. And people are strange. We operate on a number of different levels at one time. We're all pretty proud of our frontal lobes, and those are the parts of our brain that are involved in conscious thinking and planning. But really, that area of us is not the most predominant and influential area of our brains. The more influential areas have to do with the limbic system, which deals with the emotions, and the reticular formation, which is the thing that decides which of the incoming stimuli is going to be even passed along to the frontal lobe or not. So these were structures that developed earlier than the frontal lobe, and we're still running on them because, like I say, they are faster than our frontal lobe. And most of the time what people do is they use their frontal lobes to rationalize things that their emotions are telling them to do. So our emotions are not logical. They are formed by our life experiences and also what people have told us that we then wind up believing. And so this is the reason why people do what they do, not because it's logical, but because it may temporarily make them feel better. So let's say, for example, somebody wants to lose weight. That's a very common scenario in America. There are all kinds of diets out there that are kind of extreme, and you can do them for 2 weeks or maybe even 3 or 4 weeks and, maybe get a relatively big weight loss. But once that time is over, oftentimes people tend to revert back to their old eating habits, and oftentimes they will gain back whatever weight they've lost, and then sometimes again a few pounds. Why? Because they weren't focusing on changing their lifestyle. They were more focusing on losing weight. So losing weight quickly is very possible, but if you don't change the habits that caused you to gain weight to begin with, then once your diet is over with, you're going to tend to gain back the weight. So I would really encourage people to focus on their habits, because it's your habits that make your health. Your habits may have been shaped by your family. They may have been shaped by, your teachers, by your colleagues. They can be good or bad, but, pay attention to your habits, because it's just so powerful to change them. And even if you just make one little change, like since the beginning of this month, I haven't added any sugar to my coffee, and that was the only form that I was consuming sugar in, but it was, a fair amount of sugar, to be honest. And I'd done it for years, been drinking coffee for decades, unfortunately. Was introduced to that when I started working in a medical lab after college, and people at that research lab would come into work and put on a pot of coffee first thing, and they wouldn't do anything in terms of work until they'd had at least 2 cups. So that's what got me started with that, and I regret it. And that will be the one remaining thing that I'm looking to tackle about my lifestyle habits after I am sure that this not having any sugar thing is going to be a permanent thing. But I feel pretty sure about that because I don't really feel that tempted. And here's another thing that I would say about lifestyle change. Don't be discouraged if you're not able to change something once and for all the first time that you try it, because that's not usually the way that human nature works. It's like, okay, well, first we'll do it for a little while, and then we'll feel too deprived and we'll go back to our old ways, and then when we're disgusted with that sufficiently, then we're going to try it again, and this time maybe might last a little longer, or maybe not. But just bear in mind that most people who eventually make some lifestyle changes, it's something that, they go back and forth with, especially in the beginning. And so don't get discouraged if your family or your friends, makes little sniping comments at you if you go back to what you used to be doing. That's just, hi, welcome. That's just, sometimes people's reactions, especially if they're doing things that you don't want to be doing, and they see that you're actually managing to evade doing those things for a while, they may become jealous and they may try to suck you back into doing whatever it was that they're doing and that they would like company with, whether that's eating gluten or, eating dairy or having a cheeseburger or whatever it is. So even though family and friends may wish you well and may want for you to be healthy, but they're not always the best examples. And so sometimes you have to be careful which people you tell your aspirations to and which people you hang out with, because all of these things can make a difference in your ability to stick with the program or not. So one thing that I would share with you, and this is a book, I think it's so interesting. It's called The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. So this is talking about it more from a corporate and professional point of view. But habits are habits, and they relate to everything. They relate to our lifestyle. They relate to the way that we socialize with other people. They relate to all sorts of things. But most people are no more aware of their lifestyle habits than a fish is aware of the water that it swims in. Presumably, it's probably not that aware of it, but maybe it is on some subconscious levels. And just like, for example, a lot of people, back in the days when people could go to the movie theater, okay, not so long ago, but a lot of people have associated in their minds the eating of popcorn, just to give you an example. So whenever they go to the movies, they think about getting popcorn, or they think about, getting nachos and soda or whatever, okay, because they associate the idea of watching a movie with eating. Same thing with watching TV. Some people, especially guys, when they're watching their sports programs on the couch in the evening, they might feel like they have to have a brewski or two. These are habits and associations. And so a lot of times we don't examine that. We don't say, well, wow, how come every time there's a commercial break, I feel obligated to get up and go to the refrigerator? It's just a habit, and usually we're not aware of these things. But once we start becoming aware of these things, and once we start focusing on our habits and trying to change our habits rather than trying to change the outcome, in other words, instead of maybe trying to lose weight by doing something extreme, what about tweaking one little thing? Tweaking one little thing, like getting rid of gluten. It's huge, and it makes a big difference. And it makes a big difference in many ways, not just to weight loss, but that was just one example of one habit that one could change to start making a better health situation for oneself. And what else did I want to tell you about habits? Well, take courage, because in the beginning, one of the biggest reasons, I think, why people may be reluctant to embark on lifestyle and habit change is because they are afraid they'll feel deprived. For example, with people who like to eat, they feel as though, if I switch over from, let's say, eating pizza to eating salads, I'm going to feel deprived. Well, that might be true in the beginning. In the beginning, they might feel somewhat deprived. But if they can push through that resistance and keep on doing it, guess what? Eventually, their tastes change. And there's a whole bunch of things that I love to eat now that when I was a child probably wouldn't have had that much attraction for me. And then there's a whole bunch of things that I would have considered very attractive when I was a child, and now you literally could not pay me to eat those things. So, the good news is that the more you persist in a new good habit, the more you're going to enjoy it and like it and not feel deprived. So, this is spring, and nature is renewing herself. And I think that this is a great opportunity for ourselves, to renew our own health. And now that some of us are home more, well, a lot of us are home more, to be honest, that gives us new opportunities to work on our habits and improve our lifestyle. So, for example, one of the things that we can do more nowadays is prepare food at home, or maybe juice at home. Maybe when we were running out the door to go to work, maybe we just said to ourselves, oh, I just don't have time for that. But now, some people are getting into gourmet chefdom, just from their homes and just because they have the time. So, regard this as an opportunity. Look at your lifestyle habits. I ran across some pieces of paper very recently that were kind of interesting. I had written down my goals. Typically January is a time when a lot of times people will aspire to better things and wish to make changes in their health and their lifestyle. So I've looked back at some of the things that I've written down that I wanted for myself, with like weight loss. And it's interesting to do these things because people often tend to compare themselves to how they would like to be, but they don't tend to look back and say, well, you know what? Even though I'm not where I want to be yet, but I'm still better than I was. So I think it was Proust who said the life unexamined is not worth living. It's worth taking a fresh look at ourselves, loving ourselves, thinking about what we want for ourselves and what the long-term results of doing the things that we do and don't do every day. A lot of times we may think about the immediate gratification of if we have that cookie, but we're not thinking about the long-term results of, well, how's that going to make us feel? And what is that going to do to, our plans to lose weight and so on. So one of the things that we can do is to have patience with ourselves, say Rome wasn't built in a day, and affirm your capacity to change. One of the affirmations that one can see in the quantum biofeedback device is I can't recall the exact words, but it's something about how I listen to my body's innate intelligence and how I'm not, how I don't have any addictions or cravings to abusive substances. And an addiction can simply be more than what is really necessary. Sometimes just a little bit of something may be enough. Maybe just a little square of dark chocolate might be enough. But a lot of times people will go beyond what they really need just out of habit. So take time, enjoy the little things in life, and feel good about yourself and your capacity to change. If I can do it, and I'm extremely resistant to change, then you can too.